first negative rebuttal.
Do you need a timer?
Would one of you guys over there just remember to turn that on and off?
I got it.
Thank you.
Is it on right now?
It's on.
Okay. We're good, that's on.
As stated by my colleagues Martina and Phil, the claim undergoing debate today as follows: be it resolved that Congress federalize the ESRB in regards to age restrictions on video games. The negative side, being represented by my team, is advocating against the change in this federalization debate. In this speech, I will be addressing the following points made by the affirmative side. Number 1, negative effects on the brain accumulate from playing violent video games. Number 2, gamers cannot distinguish the lines between fantasy and reality. 3, mental illness stems from playing violent video games. I will begin with the invalidated statement made by Kai in the second constructive in terms of these negative effects on the brain, apparently caused by these violent video games. According to Dr. Pamela Rutledge, director of the Media Psychology Research Center, gamers actually have an increased ability to problem solve, become more focused and able to multitask, and are more apt to discover interests and hobbies after playing a game, and a score on average a 23% higher score on creativity tests and an average of 10 to 20% higher on perpetual and cognitive tests. Gamers are also said to increase the functions of the hippocampus, which is the part of the brain in charge of sensory information and memory, the orbitofrontal cortex, which affects decision-making, and the dorsal cingulated cortex, the planning section of the brain. According to a study conducted at Queen Mary University, playing video games may help slow the degree of mental decay associated with the natural aging process, which debunks the theory that video games have any sort of correlation with negative effects on the brain. The second part that was brought up by the affirmative side was that gamers can no longer distinguish fantasy from reality, causing a cloud of confusion in the activity of normal life. Dr. Rutledge stated that individual differences among players, emotional maturity, and social skills influence the impact of the game. Most gamers just see the violence as a new mystery to solve, nothing else. According to Grand Theft Auto, the surprising truth about video games, the big fear that most people have about these violent video games is that these games are made more children more violent, engaging in illegal and immoral acts, and are not supported by any sort of medical research. In contrast to the theory that these games are to blame, according to a recent Opposing Viewpoints article, the rate of juvenile violent crimes are at a 30-year low, finding that people serving time in prison for violent crimes typically consume less violent media prior to committing the crime. According to Video Games and Your Children, video games allow youth to regulate their emotional state during play. Research shows that perceptions of being in control reduce common stresses of teenage life and should have no role in crimes related to offenses that have occurred. Finally, the last claim made by the affirmative side was that the violent video games are linked with mental illness and violent acts. A 2004 Secret Service review of previous school-based attacks found that 1 in 8 of attackers exhibited an interest in video games, and according to Video Games Don't Make Kids Violent, the strongest risks of mental stability are all chemically present before the introduction of video games to that individual. You can look at dozens of infamous school shooters and find that in all cases the media fails to inform and enforce the idea that these people have pre-existing conditions that cause the violence, justified by family and friends, later interviewed. Instead, the media pinpoints these acts as a result of playing a violent video game. 97% of adolescents play video games, so is it even a fair correlation to make? To conclude this debate, I would like to mention a few quotes about the effects on video games to students here at Oyster River High School. Players who range from 1 to 14 hours of weekly play. All were asked various questions, including the age they started playing violent video games, some as young as 6 years old. All did agree that they feel more content after playing, but did not agree that violent content has any effect on how they live their daily lives. Video games are just entertainment to me. They are simply something to pass the time and should never be a case for violence. And if violence did occur, there is a much big factor present, said senior Sean Coet. When asked to respond to the statement, teens involved in shootings play video games to prep for the shooting and are the main factor in decision making, senior Zach Martin replies, it would almost be weird if the student did not play a video game. You look around and everyone of all ages is playing, so you can't pinpoint that as a main factor. The video game doesn't put a gun in the player's hand and can prep you not for a real life situation in any way. These students feel strongly in the social and mental aspects that gamers gain by playing video games. It should not be to blame for the havoc that humanity has had to deal with in the past decade. Jane McGonigal once said, reality is broken, game designers fix it. Video games are a new type of art for the 21st century and should not be thought of as this taboo activity that can only cause destruction. We all need to look at the big picture that video games do hold a very positive outlet for millions of teens across the world. It should not be looked down upon due to the mere fact that it is often correlated with the unjustified claims of the affirmative side. Video games are a technological form of enjoyment and entertainment, not something to be feared, and in no way, shape, or form need to be regulated by the ESRB federally due to these misinterpretations. Thank you.